Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot of Riverside Community Center. The morning sun was already blazing hot, and she knew it would be another long day ahead. At 28, Sarah looked younger than her age, with her petite frame and soft features often causing people to underestimate her. What they couldn't see was the steel spine that had carried her through 4 tours as a Navy medic in Afghanistan and Iraq. The community center buzzed with activity. Volunteers moved boxes of supplies, while others set up registration tables for the veteran support program Sarah had started 6 months ago. The program, called Bridge Home, helped returning veterans transition back to civilian life by providing job training, mental health support, and housing assistance. Sarah had used her entire savings and a small grant to get it off the ground. "Sarah, thank God you're here," called out Maria Santos, one of her volunteers. Maria rushed over, her face creased with worry. "We have a problem. A big one." Sarah set down her coffee and turned her full attention to Maria. This was how Sarah operated: when someone needed help, everything else could wait. "What's going on?" 3 men in expensive suits showed up about an hour ago. "They're from some development company called Pinnacle Properties. They're claiming the city promised them this building for a luxury apartment complex. They want us out by the end of the week." Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "Where are they now?" "In your office. They've been going through papers, taking photos. When I told them to stop, one of them laughed and said I should mind my own business before I got hurt." Sarah had dealt with worse threats in combat zones, but this felt different. This was her community, her mission to help veterans who had given everything for their country. She walked toward her office, her military training automatically kicking in. She observed everything: the expensive cars in the parking lot, the way the volunteers looked nervous, the tension in the air. Her office door was open. Inside, 3 men in tailored suits rifled through her filing cabinets. The leader, a tall man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, looked up when she entered. His name tag read Richard Blackwood, Senior Partner. "You must be Sarah Martinez," Blackwood said, not bothering to stand or stop his search through her files. "We need to talk." "Get out of my office," Sarah said quietly. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect in life-or-death situations. Blackwood smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't think you understand the situation, sweetheart. This building is going to be ours very soon. The city council is voting next week to approve our development proposal. You can make this easy on everyone and start packing now. First, don't call me sweetheart. Second, we have a 5-year lease on this building. Third, get out of my office before I call the police." One of Blackwood's associates, a heavy-set man with gold teeth, stepped closer to Sarah. "You don't want to make enemies of the wrong people, little girl. Accidents happen all the time in this neighborhood." Sarah had faced down armed insurgents and survived IED explosions. A bully in a suit didn't even register as a real threat. "Is that supposed to scare me?" Blackwood held up a hand to stop his associate from getting closer. "Look, Ms. Martinez, I can see you're passionate about your little charity project. That's admirable. But business is business. The city needs tax revenue, and luxury apartments generate a lot more money than a facility for broken soldiers." The words "broken soldiers" hit Sarah like a physical blow. These men had no idea what veterans had sacrificed, what they continue to struggle with every day. These aren't broken soldiers. They're heroes who served their country and deserve our support. "Heroes don't come home with drug problems and PTSD," Blackwood sneered. "They don't end up homeless and unemployed. Face reality: you're enabling losers who can't handle civilian life." Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she kept her voice level. "You need to leave. Now. Or what? You'll call your daddy?" The gold-toothed man laughed. "We checked you out, princess. You're nobody. No political connections, no money, no power. You're way out of your league." "The lease is ironclad," Sarah said. "Check with your lawyers. Blackwood pulled out a folder and tossed it on Sarah's desk. Actually, we already did. Turns out your lease has a little clause about the building being used for appropriate community purposes. Our lawyers think helping drug addicts and mental cases doesn't qualify. Sarah picked up the folder and scanned the legal documents inside. Her heart sank as she read the language. The clause was vague enough that a good lawyer could probably argue either way. This is ridiculous. We help veterans find jobs, get education, reconnect with their families. Judge Martinez might see it differently, Blackwood said with a smug smile. Yes, we know about your father. Funny thing about judges, they really care about their reputation. It would be unfortunate if someone accused him of giving his daughter special treatment on that lease approval. Sarah felt ice in her veins. Her father, Judge Roberto Martinez, had nothing to do with the lease. He had specifically refused to help when Sarah asked, saying she needed to succeed on her own merits. But that wouldn't matter if Blackwood spread lies about corruption. My father had nothing to do with this lease. Prove it, Blackwood said. Because we're prepared to file complaints with the Judicial Ethics Committee, contact the local media, make a very big fuss about nepotism and corruption. Even if the charges don't stick, the investigation alone could destroy his career. Sarah realized this was bigger than just losing the building. These men were willing to destroy innocent people to get what they wanted. What do you want? Smart girl. We want you to voluntarily terminate your lease. In exchange, we won't pursue any questions about how you got this building in the first place. Everyone wins. Except the veterans who need help. The gold-toothed man stepped closer again. Those losers can find somewhere else to cry about their problems. This is prime real estate, and it's being wasted on charity cases. Sarah looked around her office, the walls covered with photos of successful program graduates, thank you letters from families, certificates of appreciation from veteran organizations. She thought about Marcus Thompson, who had been living under a bridge before the program helped him get clean and find work. About Jennifer Walsh, who had attempted suicide twice before finding purpose volunteering with Bridge Home. About dozens of other veterans who had found hope in this building. I need time to think about it, Sarah said. You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m., Blackwood said. After that, things get complicated for everyone. The three men walked out, leaving Sarah alone with her racing thoughts. She sat in her chair and tried to process what had just happened. In combat, the threats were direct and immediate. This was different, a web of legal manipulation, political pressure, and character assassination designed to force her surrender. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Channel 7 News wants to do a story about the program. Should I schedule it? Sarah stared at the message. Media attention could help, but it could also backfire if Blackwood followed through on his threats about her father. She needed advice, but who could she trust with something this complex? The answer came to her as she remembered a conversation from the previous month. Commander Jake Sullivan, a Navy SEAL who had transitioned out of the service 2 years earlier, had attended one of her program events. He worked now as a corporate security consultant but remained passionate about veteran issues. More importantly, he understood how powerful people operated and how to fight back against intimidation. Sarah found Jake's business card in her desk drawer and dialed his number. Sullivan Security Consulting, this is Jake. Commander Sullivan, this is Sarah Martinez from Bridge Home. We met at the Veteran Appreciation Dinner last month. Of course, Sarah. How's the program going? Actually, I'm in trouble and need advice. Could we meet somewhere private? Jake's tone immediately became serious. What kind of trouble? The kind that involves lawyers, threats, and people trying to destroy everything I built. Where are you now? My office at the community center. Don't leave. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Sarah spent the waiting time reviewing the legal documents Blackwood had left behind and researching Pinnacle properties online. What she found made her stomach turn. The company had a history of aggressive development tactics, including several cases where they had forced out community organizations through legal pressure and intimidation. One article from 2 years earlier caught her attention. Pinnacle had targeted a homeless shelter in another part of the state, using similar tactics: legal challenges, political pressure, and personal attacks on the organization's leadership. The shelter had eventually been forced to close, and the land was now a luxury shopping complex. When Jake arrived, Sarah barely recognized him from their brief meeting at the dinner. At the formal event, he had been polite but reserved. Now, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, he moved with the focused intensity of someone assessing a battlefield. "Tell me everything," he said, closing the office door behind him. Sarah walked through the morning's events, showing Jake the legal documents and explaining the threats against her father. Jake listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines and specific language used. "These guys are professionals," Jake said when she finished. "This isn't their first rodeo. The threat against your father is classic: find pressure points that have nothing to do with the actual issue and use them as leverage. So what do I do? If I fight, they destroy my father's reputation. If I give up, dozens of veterans lose their lifeline." Jake studied the legal documents more carefully. "First, we need to understand what we're really dealing with. This isn't just about real estate, it's about a systematic campaign to eliminate veteran support services. Look at this." He pulled out his tablet and showed Sarah a map of the city with various locations marked. "Pinnacle Properties has been quietly acquiring properties all over this district. Not random acquisitions, specifically targeting veteran services, mental health clinics, job training centers. Why? Because helping veterans is expensive and complicated. Much easier to warehouse them in jails and homeless camps than deal with the real problems. If you eliminate the support systems, you eliminate the inconvenient reminders that society has obligations to the people who served." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. "This is bigger than just my program. Much bigger. But that also means you're not alone in this fight." Jake's expression hardened with determination. "The question is, how far are you willing to go to protect what you've built?" "As far as it takes." "Good. Because these people are counting on you being reasonable, being scared, being willing to compromise. They've probably never dealt with someone who's been shot at in defense of principles that actually matter." "What's our first move?" Jake smiled for the first time since arriving. "We're going to do something they won't expect. We're going to attack." The afternoon was spent planning. Jake made calls to contacts in local media, veteran organizations, and political circles. Sarah reached out to program participants and community supporters. By evening, they had the framework of a counter-campaign. "Remember," Jake said as he prepared to leave, "tomorrow when they call for your answer, you're not the same person they intimidated this morning. Tomorrow, you're a veteran standing up for veterans, backed by people who understand what that means." Sarah locked up the building that night feeling something she hadn't felt in months: hope. The fight was just beginning, but, for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. She thought about all the veterans who had trusted her with their stories, their struggles, their dreams of building better lives. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwood would discover that he had badly misjudged his opponent. Sarah Martinez wasn't just running a charity program, she was defending a principle worth fighting for. As she drove home, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her father's number. "Mija, I heard some men came by asking questions about the community center lease. Is everything okay?" Sarah realized Blackwood's people had already started their campaign of intimidation. "It's complicated, Dad. But I'm handling it." "Sarah, if someone is threatening you or trying to use me as leverage, you need to tell me everything. I didn't become a judge to hide from fights that matter." For the first time all day, Sarah smiled genuinely. Maybe she had more allies than she realized. The war for Bridge Home was about to begin. The next morning arrived with unexpected developments. Sarah reached the community center early to find 3 news vans parked outside and a small crowd gathering near the entrance. Her phone had been buzzing since 5 a.m. with calls from reporters, veteran organizations, and community supporters. Jake was already there, talking quietly with a woman Sarah recognized as Amanda Chen from Channel 7 News. When he saw Sarah approaching, he walked over with a grim expression. "They moved faster than we expected," Jake said. Blackwood's people contacted every local media outlet at dawn with a story about corruption and nepotism in city contracts. "They're claiming your father used his influence to secure the building lease illegally." Sarah's stomach dropped. Are the reporters buying it? Some are asking questions. But Amanda here has been doing her own research. Tell her what you found. Amanda Chen stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Ms. Martinez, I've spent the morning reviewing public records about your lease agreement. The timeline doesn't support Pinnacle's corruption claims. Your application was approved by a city committee 6 months before your father even took the bench. He literally had nothing to do with the decision. Can you prove that?" "Already have. The question is whether you want to go public with this story or handle it privately." Sarah looked around at the growing crowd. Several people held signs supporting Bridge Home, while others seemed curious about the corruption allegations. She spotted Marcus Thompson, the former homeless veteran who now worked as a maintenance supervisor at a local hotel. Jennifer Walsh was there too, along with a dozen other program participants. "What's the downside of going public?" Jake answered. "Pinnacle has deep pockets and good lawyers. They can drag this out in court for years, drain your resources, and make your life miserable. The safe play is to negotiate a quiet settlement and relocate the program." "And the upside?" Amanda smiled. "You expose a pattern of bullying and intimidation that affects the entire community. Pinnacle has been quietly pressuring other veteran services across the state. If someone finally stands up to them publicly, it could stop their entire operation." Before Sarah could answer, a black Lincoln Town car pulled up. Richard Blackwood emerged, followed by his 2 associates and a woman Sarah didn't recognize. The woman wore an expensive suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. "That's Patricia Stevenson," Jake said quietly. "Pinnacle's head of public relations. Former political operative, specializes in crisis management and character assassination." The Pinnacle team approached the growing crowd with practiced ease. Stevenson immediately began talking to reporters, while Blackwood walked directly toward Sarah with a document folder in his hand. "Ms. Martinez, I'm disappointed you chose to make this public," Blackwood said loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. "We came here in good faith to discuss a reasonable transition, but now I see you prefer drama to honest negotiation." "What transition?" Sarah asked, matching his volume. "You mean your demand that I abandon veterans who need help so you can build luxury apartments?" Several reporters moved closer, phones recording. Stevenson tried to redirect their attention, but they were more interested in the direct confrontation. "Ms. Martinez," Blackwood continued, "I have here documentation showing serious irregularities in how you obtained this building lease. Are you willing to explain to these reporters how your father's judicial position influenced the city's decision?" Sarah felt the moment crystallizing around her. She could back down, accept Blackwood's narrative, and spend the next months fighting defensive battles in courtrooms and newspapers. Or she could do what Jake had suggested, attack. "Actually, Mr. Blackwood, I'd like to ask you some questions. How many veteran service organizations has Pinnacle Properties targeted for closure in the past 3 years?" Blackwood's composure slipped slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah turned to address the reporters directly. "Pinnacle Properties has systematically targeted veteran support services across multiple communities, using legal intimidation and false corruption charges to force closures. They've closed homeless shelters, job training programs, and mental health clinics. All to build luxury developments that price working families out of their own neighborhoods." "That's a serious accusation," Amanda Chen said, camera rolling. "Do you have documentation?" Jake stepped forward with his tablet. "Pinnacle Properties has closed veteran facilities in 7 communities over the past 2 years. Same pattern every time: legal challenges to lease agreements, allegations of corruption or mismanagement, character assassination of program leaders. Patricia Stevenson pushed forward. Those facilities failed because they were poorly managed and financially unsustainable. Pinnacle Properties has invested billions in community development and job creation. What jobs? Sarah asked. Minimum wage service positions that require workers to commute hours because they can't afford to live where they work? The crowd was growing larger, and Sarah noticed something important happening. Veterans were arriving not just from her program, but from across the community. Someone had clearly spread the word through veteran networks, and they were showing up in support. Among them was a group Sarah didn't immediately recognize. Older veterans, wearing crisp clothing and military bearing despite their civilian clothes. They positioned themselves at the edge of the crowd, watching the proceedings with the alertness of people accustomed to tactical situations. Blackwood seemed to notice them too. His confidence wavered slightly as he took in their presence. Ms. Martinez, he said, trying to regain control of the narrative, you can grandstand all you want, but, at the end of the day, you have a legal deadline. Either you vacate the building voluntarily, or we'll pursue all available remedies through the courts. What remedies? Jake asked, stepping closer to Blackwood. Your lease challenge is based on false premises. Your corruption allegations are contradicted by public records. Sounds like harassment to me. The gold-toothed associate who had threatened Sarah the day before moved to stand behind Blackwood. Maybe you should worry about your own legal problems, soldier boy. Wrong move. Several of the veterans in the crowd stiffened, and Jake's expression went completely cold. I'm sorry, did you just threaten a Navy SEAL in front of witnesses and cameras? Amanda Chen asked, clearly delighted by the unexpected drama. The gold-toothed man looked around nervously as he realized his mistake. The older veterans had moved closer, and their body language had shifted from observational to protective. Nobody threatened anybody, Stevenson said quickly. This is exactly the kind of inflammatory rhetoric that makes productive dialogue impossible. Productive dialogue? Sarah stepped forward, her medical training taking over as she assessed the situation like a triage nurse who needed help, who was dangerous, who could be an ally. Yesterday you threatened to destroy my father's career with false corruption charges. This morning you spread lies to the media. When exactly did you want to have productive dialogue? Marcus Thompson stepped out of the crowd. Ms. Martinez helped me get clean and find work when nobody else would even talk to me. These suits don't know what they're talking about. I was homeless for 8 months after my discharge, Jennifer Walsh added. Bridge Home saved my life. More veterans began speaking up, sharing their stories. The reporters moved through the crowd, collecting testimonials and personal accounts of how the program had helped. Blackwood looked increasingly uncomfortable as he realized the narrative was slipping away from him. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the legal realities. This building is worth $12 million. Luxury housing creates jobs and tax revenue. Emotional appeals don't override economic facts. 12 million? Jake asked with genuine curiosity. That's interesting, because the city assessed this building at $3 million 2 years ago. How exactly did the value quadruple? Amanda Chen looked up from her notes. That's a great question. Mr. Blackwood, do you have documentation supporting that valuation? Property values fluctuate based on development potential, Stevenson interjected smoothly. The surrounding area has seen significant appreciation. Due to the presence of community services like Bridge Home, Sarah shot back. Programs that help people get stable housing and employment, which improves neighborhood safety and property values. One of the older veterans, a man with silver hair and a bearing that screamed senior military leadership, approached the group. Sarah noticed the other veterans automatically made space for him, suggesting significant respect. Excuse me, the man said politely to Blackwood. I'm Colonel Mitchell, retired Marines. I'd like to ask you a question about your development plans. Blackwood nodded warily. If you close this facility, where exactly do you expect these veterans to receive services? The VA hospital is 40 miles away and has a 6-month waiting list for mental health services. The next closest job training program is in another county entirely. There are other resources available, Stevenson answered for Blackwood. Such as? Stevenson clearly hadn't expected detailed follow-up questions. The VA provides comprehensive services for eligible veterans. Colonel Mitchell smiled without humor. Ma'am, with respect, that's nonsense. The VA is understaffed and overwhelmed. Community programs like this one are essential for veterans who don't qualify for VA services or can't access them due to transportation or scheduling issues. Are you saying the government can't handle veteran services without private charity? Blackwood asked, trying to regain the offensive. Wrong question to ask a Marine colonel. I'm saying that citizens and communities have moral obligations that can't be outsourced to bureaucracy, Mitchell replied crisply. This young woman is fulfilling those obligations. You're trying to profit by abandoning them. The crowd murmured agreement, and Sarah noticed the energy shifting decisively in their favor. Blackwood and his team were losing control of the situation. Look, Blackwood said, clearly frustrated, this is all academic. We have legal grounds to challenge the lease, and we have the resources to pursue litigation as long as necessary. Ms. Martinez can't afford a prolonged court battle. Actually, said a new voice from behind the crowd, that's not quite accurate. Everyone turned to see Judge Roberto Martinez approaching, still in his judicial robes. Sarah's heart jumped, her father was supposed to be in court all morning. Dad, what are you doing here? I recessed court when I heard about the allegations against me, Judge Martinez said calmly. I've spent the morning reviewing the public records of your lease application with the court clerk and city attorney. He walked directly to Blackwood and handed him a thick folder of documents. Mr. Blackwood, these records show conclusively that I had no involvement whatsoever in my daughter's lease approval. The timeline makes your corruption allegations legally impossible. I'm giving you 30 minutes to publicly retract your statements before I contact the State Bar Association about your conduct. Patricia Stevenson paled. False allegations of judicial corruption were serious matters that could result in sanctions against the lawyers involved. Your Honor, she began, I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Judge Martinez interrupted. You deliberately made false statements about my conduct to intimidate my daughter and manipulate media coverage. That's not a misunderstanding, it's misconduct. Amanda Chen was filming everything, and Sarah realized the story had completely transformed. Instead of a corruption scandal, it was becoming an expose of corporate bullying and intimidation. Blackwood looked around desperately, clearly realizing that his carefully planned campaign was falling apart in real time. We're prepared to make a very generous offer for a voluntary lease termination, he said, pulling out another document. $2 million, plus relocation assistance for your program participants. The crowd fell silent. $2 million was an enormous amount of money, enough to relocate and expand the program significantly. Sarah looked around at the faces watching her, veterans who had trusted her with their recovery, community supporters who believed in the mission, media representatives documenting every word. Mr. Blackwood, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, you could offer $20 million, and the answer would still be no. This isn't about money. It's about keeping promises to people who have already sacrificed everything for this country. The crowd erupted in applause, and Sarah saw Colonel Mitchell nod approvingly. Blackwood's facade finally cracked completely. You're making a serious mistake, Ms. Martinez. Pinnacle Properties doesn't lose these fights. Maybe you've just never fought the right people before, Jake said quietly. As the Pinnacle team retreated to their car, Sarah realized that winning this public confrontation was just the beginning. They had exposed Blackwood's tactics and gained media support, but the legal battle was still ahead. What happens next? She asked Jake as the crowd began to disperse. Now we find out how serious they really are about this fight. And, more importantly, we find out who else is willing to stand with us when things get difficult. Colonel Mitchell approached before leaving. Ms. Martinez, you handled yourself well today. If you need additional support, you should know that the veteran community has resources you might not expect. Sarah was still processing what that meant as the last of the crowd dispersed and the reporters finished their interviews. She had wanted to save Bridge Home, but somehow the fight had become much larger. The war was just beginning, but today had proven something important: she wasn't fighting alone. 2 weeks after the public confrontation, Sarah discovered that Richard Blackwood had not been exaggerating when he said Pinnacle Properties didn't lose fights. The company had filed a comprehensive legal assault that seemed designed more to exhaust her resources than to win quickly. Sarah sat in the cramped office of her attorney, Lisa Wong, reviewing the latest batch of legal documents. Lisa was young and dedicated, but she specialized in nonprofit law, not complex commercial litigation. The stack of motions, injunctions, and discovery requests from Pinnacle's legal team looked overwhelming. "They're using a scorched earth strategy," Lisa explained, pushing her glasses up nervously. 17 separate motions, demands for 10,000 pages of documentation, depositions of everyone connected to the program. "Even if we win every challenge, the legal fees alone will bankrupt the organization." Sarah stared at the legal bills accumulating on Lisa's desk. 3 weeks of fighting had already cost more than the program's entire annual budget. "How long can we hold out?" "Maybe 2 months at this pace." "Unless..." Lisa hesitated. "Unless what?" "Unless you consider settling. They've actually increased their offer to $4 million, plus guaranteed funding for a smaller program in a different location." Sarah had been awake since 4 a.m., running the numbers in her head. $4 million would fund veteran services for years, even if they had to operate from a smaller facility. It would be the practical, responsible choice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake: "Turn on Channel 7. Emergency." Sarah found a television in Lisa's waiting room and switched to the local news. Amanda Chen was standing outside a familiar building across town, the Veterans Crisis Center that provided suicide prevention and mental health services. "This is the third Veterans Services facility targeted by Pinnacle Properties this month," Amanda was saying. "Like Bridge Home, the Crisis Center is facing legal challenges that threaten to close programs serving hundreds of veterans monthly." The camera panned to show protesters outside the Crisis Center, holding signs that read "Protect Our Veterans" and "Stop the War on Heroes." Sarah recognized many of the faces from the Bridge Home demonstration. Her phone rang. Jake's voice was tense. "Are you watching this?" "Just turned it on." "How many facilities are they targeting?" "At least 6 that we know of, probably more." "Sarah, this is bigger than we thought. Pinnacle isn't just going after individual buildings, they're trying to systematically eliminate veteran services across the entire region." "Why would they do that?" "Because veteran support programs are inconvenient for gentrification. Hard-to-market luxury neighborhoods when visible homelessness and mental health issues remind people that society has unfinished obligations." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. "They're not just developing real estate, they're socially engineering entire communities." "Exactly. And here's the scary part: it's working. 3 facilities have already closed rather than fight. The veterans using those services are just disappearing from sight." Sarah thought about Marcus Thompson, Jennifer Walsh, and dozens of other veterans whose lives had been transformed by having access to support programs. Where would they go if all these services disappeared? "Jake, I need to ask you something directly. Are you sure you want to keep helping with this? Pinnacle is playing for keeps, and this could get ugly." There was a long pause before Jake answered. "Sarah, do you know what a SEAL team is really for?" "Special operations. More specifically, we handle situations where conventional approaches have failed and the stakes are too high to accept defeat. This qualifies." After hanging up, Sarah walked back to Lisa's office with a decision crystallizing in her mind. "I want to see all the files on the other facilities Pinnacle has targeted." "Sarah, that could take weeks of research, then we'd better get started." That afternoon, Sarah and Lisa began assembling a comprehensive picture of Pinnacle's campaign. The pattern was unmistakable: the company systematically identified veteran service providers in valuable locations, then used a combination of legal pressure, political influence, and financial warfare to force closures. Look at this, Lisa said, pointing to a timeline chart she had created. They don't attack randomly. They target facilities that serve the most vulnerable populations first: homeless shelters, addiction treatment, mental health services. The programs that deal with the messiest, most visible problems. And, once those are gone, property values rise, neighborhoods gentrify, and the veteran populations either disappear or relocate to areas where there's someone else's problem. Sarah was studying the financial documents when something caught her attention. Lisa, who's funding Pinnacle's development projects? Lisa pulled out another folder. Multiple investors, but the largest funding source is something called the Urban Renewal Investment Fund. What's that? Private equity fund that specializes in distressed urban properties. They buy up buildings in transitional neighborhoods, eliminate services for vulnerable populations, then redevelop for luxury markets. Sarah's blood ran cold as the full scope of the scheme became clear. This isn't about real estate development, it's about social cleansing. They're using veteran services as a test case for eliminating any programs that serve inconvenient populations. Her phone buzzed with another text, this time from an unknown number: stop digging or face consequences. Last warning. Sarah showed the message to Lisa, who immediately went pale. Maybe we should contact the police. And tell them what? Someone sent a vague text message? These people are too smart to make direct threats that leave evidence. As if summoned by her words, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Pinnacle Properties. Ms. Martinez, this is Patricia Stevenson. I think it's time we had a more private conversation about your situation. I don't have anything to say to you privately. I think you do. Are you familiar with the background check process for federal security clearances? Sarah's stomach dropped. She had applied for a part-time position with the Department of Veterans Affairs that would require security clearance, additional income to help fund the program. Your point? Security clearances are very sensitive to any suggestion of financial irregularities or legal problems. It would be unfortunate if the ongoing legal disputes around Bridge Home created complications for your federal employment prospects. The threat was clear. Even if Sarah won the legal battle for the building, Pinnacle could make sure she was unemployable in her field. Is there anything else? Sarah asked. Actually, yes. We've been reviewing the background of your consultant, Jake Sullivan. Former Navy SEAL with an interesting service record. Multiple deployments, some classified operations. It would be tragic if questions arose about his post-service activities or psychological fitness. Sarah felt fury building in her chest. Are you threatening to attack a veteran's military record? I'm simply noting that people with complex military backgrounds sometimes face challenges transitioning to civilian life. Mental health issues, authority problems, difficulty with legal boundaries. The kind of issues that might concern potential clients of a security consulting business. The call ended, leaving Sarah shaking with rage. These people weren't just attacking her program, they were threatening to destroy the lives and careers of anyone who stood with her. She called Jake immediately. They just threatened your security clearance and business reputation. I heard. Stevenson called me 5 minutes ago with a similar message. Apparently, someone's been asking questions about my military service and psychological evaluations. Jake, maybe you should step back from this. I can't let them destroy your career. Sarah, you need to understand something about military service. When you take an oath to defend your country, it doesn't expire when you take off the uniform. These people are attacking American veterans and the community members trying to help them. That makes this a national security issue. What do you mean? I mean it's time to escalate this fight to a level where Pinnacle Properties isn't the biggest player in the room. That evening, Jake arrived at Sarah's apartment with a guest she didn't expect, Colonel Mitchell, the Marine who had supported them at the demonstration. Ms. Martinez, Colonel Mitchell said, Jake has briefed me on the scope of what you're facing. I think it's time you understood what resources are actually available to support this fight. Colonel Mitchell pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a map of the United States dotted with hundreds of markers. Every marker represents a veteran service organization that's been targeted by private equity firms using tactics similar to Pinnacle's.
This isn't a local problem, it's a coordinated national campaign. Sarah stared at the map in shock. How is this legal?
It's not illegal to buy property and change its use. It's not illegal to challenge lease agreements or file legal motions.
Each individual action is technically within legal boundaries.
But the coordinated pattern suggests something more problematic.
Like what? Colonel Mitchell looked at Jake, who nodded encouragement.
Ms. Martinez, there are federal laws about conspiracies to deprive people of their civil rights. There are also laws about coordinated attacks on programs that serve protected populations. If we can prove that this campaign is coordinated and intentional, it becomes a federal civil rights issue.
Do we have that evidence?
Jake opened his own tablet, showing Sarah a complex flowchart connecting various investment funds, development companies, and political organizations.
We've been building this case for the past 2 weeks.
The money trail connects Pinnacle to at least 12 other development companies across 6 states, all targeting veteran services.
How did you get this information so quickly? Colonel Mitchell smiled. Ms. Martinez, the military community includes people in many different careers after service. Financial analysts, investigators, attorneys, politicians. When word spreads that someone is systematically attacking veteran programs, resources become available. Sarah felt a mix of hope and intimidation. What are you proposing? A coordinated counter-campaign.
Federal civil rights investigation, congressional oversight hearings, national media attention. Instead of fighting defensive battles in local courtrooms, we take this to a level where Pinnacle and their backers face real consequences.
What would that mean for Bridge Home?
Short-term, more legal complexity and media attention. Long-term, protection not just for your program but for veteran services nationwide. Sarah thought about the threats against her father, Jake, and herself.
Then, she thought about the veterans who would lose access to services if these programs were eliminated. What do you need from me?
Colonel Mitchell's expression became deadly serious. We need you to be willing to see this fight through to the end, no matter how difficult it becomes.
Because once we escalate to federal level, there's no backing down. Pinnacle will use every resource they have to destroy you personally. And if I say no?
Then, you take Pinnacle's money, relocate your program, and hope they don't come after the new location in a few years.
Sarah walked to her window, looking out at the neighborhood where Bridge Home operated.
She could see the community center building in the distance, lights still on where volunteers were preparing for tomorrow's job training session.
Colonel, can you guarantee we'll win if we escalate? No. I can guarantee that if we don't fight, they'll definitely win.
Sarah turned back to face the 2 military veterans who had committed to helping her.
Then, let's find out what happens when people who fight for a living get tired of being pushed around. Colonel Mitchell nodded approvingly. Outstanding. Jake, initiate Phase 2. What's Phase 2? Sarah asked. Jake's expression was grimmer than she had ever seen it.
We stop playing defense and start hunting the people who think they can attack American veterans without consequences. As Colonel Mitchell and Jake began making phone calls, Sarah realized that her small fight to save a community program had somehow evolved into something much larger. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwood would discover that his carefully planned campaign had attracted the attention of people with resources and capabilities he had never considered. The real war was about to begin. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the marble lobby of the federal courthouse, watching Richard Blackwood and his legal team emerge from the elevator looking shell-shocked. The morning's hearing had not gone as Pinnacle Properties expected. Federal Judge Catherine Morrison had just issued a temporary restraining order halting all legal actions against veteran service organizations pending a full investigation into civil rights violations. More significantly, she had frozen the assets of the Urban Renewal Investment Fund pending review of their coordinated campaign against protected populations.
Ms. Martinez, Amanda Chen approached with her camera crew. How does it feel to have your little community program spark a federal civil rights investigation?
Sarah looked around the lobby, taking in the scene that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. The space was filled with veterans, congressional staffers, federal investigators, and media representatives from across the country. What had started as a local fight over one building had become a national examination of systematic attacks on veteran services. "It feels like we finally have a fair fight," Sarah replied. The transformation had begun 8 weeks earlier when Colonel Mitchell's contacts in Congress received the evidence Jake had assembled. Senator Patricia Hayes, herself a veteran and chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, had immediately called for federal oversight hearings. What followed was a media firestorm that exposed the scope of the coordinated campaign against veteran programs. Congressional investigators discovered that the Urban Renewal Investment Fund had systematically targeted over 200 veteran service facilities across 15 states, using identical legal and financial pressure tactics. More damaging for Pinnacle, investigators found email communications between company executives discussing the deliberate elimination of social problems to improve property values. One particularly damaging message from Richard Blackwood described veteran service programs as obstacles to urban optimization that must be surgically removed. "Sarah." Jake appeared at her elbow, grinning more broadly than she had seen since the fight began. "Did you see Blackwood's face when the judge read the asset freeze order?" "I was too busy trying not to smile inappropriately in federal court." Jake's expression became more serious. "This is just the beginning of their legal problems. The Justice Department is opening a federal civil rights investigation, and 3 more states have started their own inquiries into Pinnacle's activities." Colonel Mitchell joined them, looking satisfied but not celebratory. "Ms. Martinez, you should understand that while we've won this battle, the war isn't over. Pinnacle will appeal, and there will be other companies using similar tactics. What happens to Bridge Home now? Your lease is secure pending the federal investigation, which could take years. More importantly, Congress is considering legislation to protect veteran service facilities from this kind of coordinated attack." Sarah felt a mix of relief and surreal disbelief. 6 months ago, she had been running a small community program on a shoestring budget. Now she was standing in federal court as the center of a national civil rights case. "Ms. Martinez?" A new voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see a woman in military dress uniform approaching, a Navy captain with ribbons indicating combat service and high-level command positions. "Captain Rebecca Torres," the woman introduced herself. "I wanted to personally thank you for your courage in fighting this battle." "Thank you, ma'am, but I'm not sure I did anything particularly courageous. I was just trying to keep a program running." Captain Torres smiled. "Ma'am, with respect, you stood up to a coordinated attack by wealthy and powerful people who had unlimited resources and no scruples about destroying anyone in their path. You did it to protect veterans who couldn't protect themselves. That's the definition of courage. I had a lot of help." "Yes, you did. And that help came because you proved worthy of it. Leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about being willing to take responsibility when something important is at stake." As Captain Torres walked away, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first morning when Richard Blackwood had threatened her in her office. The intimidation tactics that had seemed overwhelming were now the subject of federal criminal investigation. The legal pressure that had nearly bankrupted her organization was now being funded by veteran advocacy groups and congressional oversight budgets. "Sarah," Jake said, checking his phone, "we need to get to the press conference. Senator Hayes is about to announce the new legislation." They walked outside to find the courthouse steps packed with reporters and veterans. Senator Hayes stood at a podium surrounded by congressional colleagues and military leaders. "Today marks a turning point in our nation's commitment to veteran services," Senator Hayes began. "The coordinated attacks on veteran support programs represent not just legal violations, but moral failures that contradict our most basic obligations to the men and women who served our country." Sarah listened as the senator outlined comprehensive legislation to protect veteran service facilities, provide federal funding for programs like Bridge Home, and establish oversight mechanisms to prevent future coordinated attacks. This legislation exists because one young woman refused to be intimidated when powerful interests threatened her community's commitment to veterans.
Sarah Martinez represents the best of civilian leadership in supporting military families. The crowd applauded, and Sarah felt overwhelmed by the attention. She had never sought to be a public figure or political symbol. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed, Sarah found herself alone with Jake and Colonel Mitchell on the courthouse steps. "What happens next?" she asked. "You go back to running Bridge Home," Colonel Mitchell said. "But now you do it with federal protection, expanded funding, and national recognition. Your program is going to become a model for veteran services across the country." "And Pinnacle?" Jake's expression hardened. "Blackwood is facing federal civil rights charges and possible criminal conspiracy charges. The company is being dissolved, and their assets are being redistributed to compensate organizations they targeted." Sarah thought about the morning 6 months earlier when Richard Blackwood had dismissed her as nobody with no power. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Colonel, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That first day when you showed up at the demonstration, how did you know to be there?" Colonel Mitchell smiled mysteriously. "Ms. Martinez, the military community is smaller than most people realize. When word spreads that someone is attacking veteran programs, information travels quickly through informal networks." "But how did word spread so fast?" Jake answered. "Because I made some phone calls after our first meeting. When a Navy SEAL tells other veterans that someone is systematically attacking veteran services, people pay attention." Sarah realized she still didn't fully understand the scope of the support network that had emerged around her fight. How many people were involved in building the federal case? "Dozens," Colonel Mitchell said. "Financial analysts who donated time to trace money flows. Attorneys who worked pro bono on legal research. Former military intelligence officers who helped coordinate evidence gathering. Congressional staffers who expedited oversight processes." Why would all these people help someone they didn't know? "Because you were fighting for something that mattered to all of us," Jake replied. "And because you proved you wouldn't quit when things got difficult." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same community center where the fight had begun, but the building was transformed. Federal grants had funded expansion into adjacent buildings, new programs, and additional staff. Bridge Home now served over 300 veterans monthly and had become a training center for similar programs nationwide. The wall of her office was covered with thank you letters, program completion certificates, and photos of veteran success stories. But the item she treasured most was a simple framed document, the federal court order that had ended Pinnacle Properties' campaign against veteran services. Marcus Thompson knocked on her door. He was now Bridge Home's assistant director, having completed his education and training while working full-time for the program. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you." Sarah looked up to see a young woman in civilian clothes, but with the bearing and confidence of military service. She looked nervous but determined. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Angela Rodriguez, recently discharged from the Army. I'm starting a veteran support program in Phoenix, and I was hoping you could give me some advice." Sarah smiled, remembering her own uncertainty and fear when she had started Bridge Home. "Of course. What specific challenges are you facing?" "Well, there's this development company that's been pressuring the city to cancel our building lease. They're claiming we're not a suitable use for the property, and they have lawyers sending threatening letters." Sarah felt a familiar chill of recognition. "What's the company's name?" "Sunset Development Partners. They specialize in luxury urban housing." Sarah reached for her phone to call Jake. It seemed the fight for veteran services was spreading to new battlefields. "Angela, let me make some calls. I think you're about to discover that people who attack veteran programs have seriously underestimated who they're fighting." An hour later, Jake arrived with Colonel Mitchell and a new face, a woman Sarah recognized from news coverage of the Pinnacle investigation. "Sarah, meet Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh," Colonel Mitchell said. Sarah blinked in surprise. "Jennifer Walsh? You're the veteran from our program who was homeless and suicidal before Bridge Home helped me rebuild my life," Jennifer finished with a smile. "Funny how things come full circle.
I finished law school last year and joined the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. I specialize in cases involving attacks on veteran services.
And Sunset Development Partners? Jennifer's smile turned predatory.
Is about to discover that the federal government takes these coordinated attacks very seriously.
We've been monitoring companies that use tactics similar to Pinnacle's.
Sarah looked around at the faces of the people who had committed to protecting veteran services: a Navy SEAL, a Marine colonel, a federal prosecutor who had once been a program participant, and now a new veteran ready to start her own fight.
Angela, Sarah said, turning to the young woman who had started this conversation, I think you're going to be fine.
But, more importantly, I think these companies are about to learn something important.
What's that? Angela asked.
Jake answered with the grim smile Sarah had learned to recognize. They're about to learn what happens when people trained to fight wars decide that protecting veterans is worth fighting for. As the group began planning their response to the new threat in Phoenix, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. She had started as someone trying to save a small community program. Now she was part of a national network committed to protecting veteran services from systematic attacks. The fight that had begun with Richard Blackwood's arrogant dismissal of her as nobody had revealed something powerful. When veterans and their supporters stood together, they were far from powerless. Outside her office, Sarah could hear the sounds of Bridge Home's evening programs, job training classes, counseling sessions, family support groups. The building buzzed with the energy of people rebuilding their lives and finding new purpose. Richard Blackwood had been wrong about many things, but, most fundamentally, he had misunderstood what he was really fighting against.
He thought he was intimidating one small woman running a charity program.
Instead, he had awakened a community of warriors who had spent years learning how to fight for things that mattered. The war for America's veterans would continue on new battlefields, but Sarah now knew something Richard Blackwood had learned too late: some fights are worth having, and some people never surrender.